these are overload. These are tremendously overloading to workers. You can't make 25 changes in your own behavior at the same time. Even if you've got 25 things you need to work on, you really ought to eat that elephant one bite at a time rather than trying to get it all at once. Many sites have too many observers. Almost all sites do too many observations. A lot of the observations are non-value added. They don't give good feedback. They don't get new data that's needed. And so we found a lot of opportunity to cut down the number of observations and the number of observers needed and make that whole activity fabulously more effective. Poorly targeted observations too. I mean, a lot of times you go observe an area just because it's your assigned area to go observe. There's no risk there at the time. There's no particular reason to do an observation over there other than just to hit some target number from some strategy that we're going to blanket these observations to everyone at the site. A lot of times they ignore the issues of concern to represented workers. Early versions of behavior-based safety were incredibly insensitive to union issues. There were a number of these that literally ignored and stepped on the feet of union concerns and issues, and actually caused a number of represented workforces to publish papers and talk about the evils of behavior-based safety. And there's nothing evil about improving safety. There's nothing evil about getting people involved. But like many other things, it has to be done the right way. Very often, too, managers and supervisors were pushed away from early behavior-based safety processes. They were told to leave it alone, don't tamper with it, and they don't need to tamper with it. They don't need to run it. It can be very successful as an employee-run process, but managers and supervisors need to have a very specific support role. The data that was generated by early observations and early behavior-based safety processes was generally not used very well. A lot of the reason for that was that the data itself wasn't terribly usable, but even where it was good, the use of the data was relatively weak. And almost all of the early ones had this process mentality. They had lost all feel for results. How do we get results out of this process? And they were out there just cranking the box and making sure that they hit their target numbers. A lot of these, too, had really long-term dependence, umbilical cords, going from organizations back to outside consulting firms, which is a waste of resources very often in the long term. Very few of these had any kind of sustainability strategy involved in them. So as we looked at all of this, we said there's a way to make behavior-based safety fabulously more efficient. We can cut it down in size, we can cut out non-value added steps, we can increase the efficiency of other steps, and make this a fabulously more effective and efficient process. So, what is this Lean VBS? Well, it's got to be customized, it needs to be worker-driven, and it has to be systematic. But basically, it has a skeleton with 4 bones in it. There are only 4 things that you really have to accomplish to make this all work. Now, if you accomplish those, the way you accomplish them, you can be very creative with those ways. You can customize it. You can plug it into existing structures and make it less of a change and more of a good fit for what you do. So what are these 4 things that you have to do? Number 1, you've got to focus. You've got to identify the precautions or the behaviors that aren't obvious. In fact, a lot of times they're blind spots to organizations. Because they're low probability, they're hard to see in accident data, and they're certainly hard to see by just common sense and experience, which are 2 tools that workers use. So can we discover the things that have the highest impact with the least amount of change, and can we get workers focused on those most important things? And we have a worksheet that we use in our organization to develop a focus list or a checklist in an organization. We look at the accident data and we do what we call behavioral classification of these accidents. What one thing, if everyone did it differently, would have the highest impact? What's number 2? What's number 3? Most organizations don't know what their highest impact behavioral changes would be, and just learning them is worth quite a bit in improving safety. However, we don't want to just learn them. We also want to start to influence people. If there are any book readers out there in the audience today, there's a great book, if you haven't run across it right now. It's called Influencer. It points out many things that have been obvious to us for many years, and that is that influence is not just talking people into something. There are a lot of things that influence decisions in the workplace, and if you don't understand what they are, and if you don't work with them, then a lot of times you don't actually get the behavioral change that you're looking for. So we want to focus people, then we want to influence them to stay focused and to be able to do the things that are on our list. So we want to change and understand those influences and start to work with those. Number three, one of the ways we find out what those influencers are very often is we listen to people. When you go out in the workplace and you see a worker, for instance, using the wrong tool for the job, instead of saying, hey, that's the wrong tool for the job, you need to use this one instead of that one, we try to ask and listen and understand. I'm concerned about that. Why do you use that tool for the job? And very often you hear some interesting stories. I was at a Marine Air Station just a couple of months ago, and I was in a shop, and everyone in the shop was using a handmade tool for the job. When you ask them why, you found out there's only one correct tool for the job. It's locked up in a tool cage. You have to go check it out. 40 people have to share that one tool. Now, going around and trying to talk people into using that tool instead of the homemade tool, that's not going to influence the change. But by listening, you find out what the influences are, and you get to them very quickly. Number four, you can't improve anything that you can't measure. So if we're going to focus people, for instance, on a handful of behaviors that we think can make a big difference in safety, we're going to have to measure those. How often do people do them right now after we start influencing that? How often do they do it in the future? Do we get an improvement in our conformity to our behavioral targets? Now, generally, as you get that, we call it percent safe. As you get that improved percent safe, you almost always get a corresponding decrease in accidents. It's very, very important that steering teams and people working directly with Lean behavior-based safety always know where they are in relation to accidents, and they know how what they're doing is impacting those lagging indicators. We develop a leading indicator in this percent safe. We start looking at the top of the cliff. Even when no one falls off our cliff, we know how many people are walking up to the edge at the top. And that's very proactive data, very easy to manage. But we've got to make sure as we're moving people back from one cliff, we're not getting them close to the edge of another. So we have to stay in touch with what our accidents are. This focus, by the way, changes very often as we look at ongoing accident data. There's some things that a lot of people think about behavior-based safety, and it's not true of this particular process. So what is Lean VBS not? It's not one-dimensional. There are a lot of approaches to behavior-based safety that are strictly psychology, strictly sociology, strictly behavioral science. This is a multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary approach. A lot of science went into Lean VBS, but it didn't all come from one source. This is not a one-size-fits-all process either. It's not something like DuPont Stop or Safe Start that you can buy out of a box, plug it into your organization, and it works. It requires a bit of tailoring and quite a bit of customization. It's not purely theoretical. This is an incredibly practical process. If you haven't heard the old quotes, one of Sean and my favorites, the quote that says that in theory there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice there is. This is an incredibly practical process that's working out there in many, many places in the world. Lean VBS is also not a blame game. We're not out to fix the blame, we're out to fix the problems, and that becomes very obvious once we start doing it. Lean VBS is also not a replacement for traditional safety. You still need rules, you still need procedures, you still need to be looking at environmental issues, engineering, designing, all those other things. Lean VBS is a gap strategy to get you from where traditional safety leaves off and zero accidents. It's not a silver bullet, and there's some people out there that preach that it is. It's going to do everything, and it's just not true. It's one more very good, very efficient, practical tool in your safety toolbox. A lot of people say, too, that BBS, Lean BBS even also, is only for non-union sites. Absolutely not so. 65% almost of our clients are union sites, and they buy into this, they support it, they do very, very well with it.